Hello everybody, my name is Archit Dongre. I have secured All India Rank 3. So today the purpose of this session is to deep dive into the mains preparation to sort of understand how to go about studying for the mains exam, especially with the given paucity of time and the nature of the examination where we are expected to deliver content fast in the examination, and there is not much time really to think about the question and sort of brainstorm there. So in that sense, the essence of delivering good content in the mains examination is to be prepared well in advance. So there is going to be a wide scope of things that we are going to discuss today, starting with how to analyze what we have to study. Basically, we can study what we want to, but we should know what we have to study, the important areas, the important themes, the micro themes that we must prioritize. Secondly, how should we go about studying them? Once we are aware of a certain micro theme, what is the way in which we should make our notes, or what is the way in which we should consume content? And thirdly, with the help of certain mock paper questions and their answers, and certain questions that I have written myself during the preparation as recently as 4 days just before my mains exam, I will be sharing with you guys, and we can sort of discuss about that and see how I have been able to improve the quality of my answer with the help of data, facts, diagrams. So that can somehow give you an idea of how to analyze a topic, how to prepare for the topic, and how to deliver that topic, which in my opinion is one of the main aspects of this exam, right? So just let's go over the mains paper, the distribution of the questions in the GS1, 2, 3 and 4 papers. You can see that in GS1, 255 questions, 245, 248 for 3 and 153 for GS4. It's lesser because there are case studies, not many 10 markers there, but our main fundamental papers of GS1, 2 and 3, which are of a similar nature, we have observed the trend that there are 10 markers and then 15 markers, another 10 questions, right? So it is very important. I'm going to go right from scratch because I would be assuming that many people are not very comfortable with the mains thing, because some people just study for the prelims and they clear it and they end up studying right now. So you should know the pattern of your examination. You should know what questions appear when, and you should very well know the syllabus and the themes that are in your GS1, 2 and 3 and 4, right? So this is the broad amount of questions that are being asked. Okay? So let's proceed to see the important areas in which we are asked questions, right? So take a look at this. This is the distribution of questions across the themes as we know it, right? So UPSC has given us a very broad PDF document with a lot of points and words on what areas they are expected to ask questions, right? So we have sort of categorized them into syllabus points that we are very comfortable with. So you can see here art and culture. We've seen about 30 questions, right? Modern history, 32. World history, a meager 16, right? But we should still be prepared for it in the way that we have to prepare for it, right? There is no point in skipping out certain things. Like I said, since this data is in front of you, you now know what you want to prioritize on. So for example, I would personally give lesser time to world history, 16 questions. I would much rather study your economy with 73 questions, right? I would much rather study things that people are not very well prepared for. For example, science and tech, 40 questions, security, 48 questions, and disaster management, agriculture being at 42 questions. Now just compare this. You have to study a single micro theme, agriculture, which rewards you with 42 questions. Security, not much syllabus in that, right? There is the preparation time it takes is lesser. You have very ready-made materials available, yet 48 questions asked in security. Every year we get that. So this is a sort of a broad distribution across subjects on what questions are being asked and how many questions are being asked, right? So we have to somehow look at the distribution of these questions and prioritize our areas that we want to focus on, right? For example, if I figured out that security rewards me with 48 questions and a higher number of marks in the GS3 paper, I would spend a day on studying security rather than giving my time to world history at 16 questions or post independence year at just 10 questions, right? So this is a sort of thing, we have the benefit of data in front of us. But let's suppose that you don't have this kind of a data in front of you, or you don't know how many questions are coming. You have to analyze the previous year questions and sort of see what areas are often repeated in each micro theme and each subject that is going to come for the mains exam. So that is somehow you'll get a broad idea and you know what to focus on in this mains attempt, right? Because you all obviously know that you just have around 70 odd days and it's not possible to cover everything. That's the reality, that's the harsh fact. But then if we can focus on areas that are often repeated, we can get disproportionately high marks for lesser efforts, right? So after seeing this, we'll just go into the details of the GS3 paper, right? So today I'm going to talk exclusively about the GS3 paper, the nature of this paper and how to go about it. So my marks have drastically improved in this year in the GS3 paper. Last year I had around some 89 odd marks, and this year I have been able to secure 108 marks in the GS3 paper. This has not been a luck. I have focused on this paper. I somehow tried to improve the quality of answers that I was writing. I changed the way I used to write my answers, the structuring, the answer writing structuring that people talk about. There were certain changes that I made to that as well. So we'll talk about that, but I'm here to help you remove this enigma around this paper and sort of crack the code and see what you can do to study and cover this paper well, how the notes should be formed, and what we can do to get really high marks in this paper. Certain tips and tricks we can go into. So today we'll talk about the GS3 paper by dividing it into few parts, right? So the first part of the GS3 paper is obviously economics. The whole nature of this paper is sort of economical, right? GS3 is a slightly technical paper. It is different from GS2 in the sense that in GS3 you will have to sort of rely more on giving credibility to your points, right? If I say India is a very high producer of milk, it is acceptable. But then if I say it is one of the highest producers and it produces around 24% of global milk production, this is a kind of statement as an examiner I would be really happy to see in a GS3 paper, because the nature of the paper is a sort of economical in nature, and data, fact, percentages, reports, especially your economic surveys, your budgets, they look really good in this paper. And I am sure that you will be rewarded with marks once you're able to sort of give credibility to your answers, right? So let's go into the economics trend analysis, right? You can see since there were 76 questions asked, huge number of micro themes here. But once we have this in front of us, we can take each topic and just go into it thoroughly, prepare our note, and then just practice answer writing on this. In fact, I think by having this in front of us, it makes our work so much more easier, because if I just say study economics, will be just like a headless chicken, right? So this sort of a nice, concise micro theme approach is a very good aid to studying economics. Okay, so let's look at the majority of questions that are being asked. This is surprising even for me. Food processing sector is the highest amount of questions have been asked from this particular part. On economics, it would seem very obvious to us that question should be asked on repo rate and like banking, but food processing is the highest asked portion. After that, a slightly economical topic, FDI, right? So we have FDI being asked second in line, right? Renewable energy, infrastructure, energy, construction works, investment models, inclusive growth linked with sustainable development. Very, very favorable topics for the UPSC, favorite topics of the UPSC rather. Inclusion, financial inclusion, again linked with inclusive growth, balance of payment, right? Niti Aayog Planning Commission, again hydroelectricity, one of the higher questions are being asked from this topic. You can see hydroelectricity and then renewable energy. Both are kind of interlinked. So it's not as if the themes are huge. Many of the themes are very interconnected with themselves. This is why I say that GS3 is sort of a technical paper, because there are a huge amount of interlinkages that can be made, which is in fact a good thing or a bad thing, depends on how you prepare it, right? So if you're able to see this interlinkages and your notes are how they are going to be when I show you, I don't think there is going to be much of an issue in preparing this topic. In fact, you can use it to your advantage. For example, if a question is asked on renewable energy, I might as well just use my hydroelectricity validation material as well in this, as a point or as a diagram or as a data fact, right? So it's not in silos. These topics are extremely interconnected. For example, look at digitization of economy, right? This is very well in line with our Niti Aayog reports, AI for all, right? UPI systems. Niti Aayog talks about this a lot. There are a lot of Niti reports on these things, right? Urbanization, globalization, and globalization with your BOP. So a lot of interlinkages can be made, right? So for example, corporate social responsibility, I think it is very well connected to the topic of inclusive growth as well. So let us not make a preparation get into silos. Use these micro themes, prepare them well, and then try to interlink topics. It is not at all given by the exam commission or anybody else that we cannot use our data and our validation material from any GS paper for that matter in any other GS paper. We can obviously always use any relevant fact or any relevant report or committee or commission or recommendation to substantiate our arguments, right? So this is going to be very easy for us to prepare once we have this in our hand, right? And we can sort of go into it and in depth and see now how exactly, once we have this in front of us, to prepare those notes, right? So for me, in fact, also GS3 was sort of a very daunting subject. I couldn't get my head around how to prepare all these things, but once I had this kind of a PYQ based approach to see the themes, it was easier for me to prepare. And then once I had that in hand, I prepared extensively on the validation material that I needed for each of these micro themes. And then I extensively practiced in putting those validated addition materials on paper when I used to practice my answer writing, correct? So let's take a topic, for example, suppose I want to prepare GDP now from the economic part of the GS3 paper. I today decide that I want to prepare GDP. Now, how do I do it in the best manner possible so that I'm able to get the best from this topic in the mains examination and deliver good content, right? So we'll be taking GDP, right? So GDP to see how to make notes on GDP and then value addition, right? And then finally how to deliver, because I think 80% of your game on how to get good marks is on practicing delivery, which is your answer writing practice. Okay, so let's go into your GDP questions. So firstly, if I wanted to prepare this, I would open the previous year questions on this topic. Let's look at one question. Explain the difference between computing methodology of GDP before year 2015 and after the year 2015, right? So this gives us a sense that we have to know on how a particular economic concept, for example, GDP, is calculated. Now, just think about this, brainstorm. You know something of this nature is being asked in the UPSC exam. This can be very well true now for other topics as well, right? They could ask you, and they have asked this, how does NSO calculate unemployment? There is a current weekly status approach, usual status approach, right? So you should know how those are calculated and what are the changes that have been made to those type of calculations, because this gives us a sense of that thing. They can also very well ask you on other economic concepts like balance of payment. How do you calculate that? What are the ways to, sort of get an understanding into how balance of payment calculations are made? What is the significance of a current account deficit, capital account deficit? What is the significance of capital account or current account convertibility? What is the implication on a country? What does it mean? So once you look at the PYQ of a particular micro theme, you'll sort of get this idea that how questions on other themes which are equally important be faced. This can be true for your budget. What is a deficit? In fact, if you have given this 2024 prelims, there were calculations based on what is revenue deficit, primary deficit, right? So they can now ask a mains question, okay, you have done the OMR, this in the OMR paper, now you prelims paper, now just come and show us in writing, explain to us what is the significance of a revenue deficit. Primary deficit, if you are removing interest payment calculations, what is that telling us? So the implications, the calculations, and what are the broad ideas behind all these economic concepts like budget, BOP, unemployment, right? So this is a sort of idea that you'll get once you brainstorm the PYQs. So once you know the topic, look at the PYQs. Let's, for example, take the second PYQ here. Define potential GDP, explain its determinants. Again, explain its determinants is asking you to tell what it is, what are the calculations, like what is the formula for this, how do you calculate this. Here also, computing methodology, determinants, factors that have been inhibiting India from realizing. So an analysis into that. So not just an economic term, explain that term to us, tell us how it is calculated, if there were any changes in that calculation, what were those changes, and then tell us, give us an analysis, give us an opinion on what are the factors that are sort of inhibiting that thing or promoting that thing. Or, and obviously it goes without saying that you will also have to put in your own dimensions as to how it can be made better, what are the difficulties, what are the government initiatives, so what are the best practices, which is an excellent way to conclude your answer, right? So we'll look into answer writing as well, but this is the sort of idea that you'll get. Do you agree with the view that steady GDP growth and low inflation have left the Indian economy in good shape? Give reasons to support your arguments. Again, this part is an analysis, and with the view that steady GDP growth and low inflation have left the Indian economy in good shape. This is again your opinion. So based on the data fact and the analysis that you will have done in your preparation time, you have to give your own arguments, right? So now we know an idea of how to study a topic, right? So for example, if you have a micro theme of GDP, we know that we have to study what it is, how it's calculated, what are the different analysis on that we can make, positives, negatives, whether GDP, no, just think about it. Now I can think of a question, whether is GDP a good indicator of development? It can be a good indicator of growth, but not necessarily development, right? It does not tell you what is the per capita income, right? It does not tell you if there is inequality or not. It just tells you the raw economic output in a year in a given area, right? So in that sense, there can be an analysis on whether GDP itself is a good way to, sort of judge the development aspects of a country. So this is something that you can think about, sort of project your own questions, and once you do that, you will kind of have gamed the UPSC and have an edge on that, right? So once we know this, now how do we prepare this? Okay, so let's look at certain notes that help us to prepare this topic. So GDP in front of us, right? Now, firstly, like I said, what is that term? What is that topic? What is that micro theme? We need an introduction on that. We need to know the definition of that, and we must be conceptually clear with that, right? So look at this. What is GDP? Total market value of all final goods and products, which is going to be important within a geographic bound area, regardless of nationality of individual or firm in a time period, right? So it can be a foreign national also earning in this country, in this geographical area, which will be added to our GDP. Who calculates? CSO. Then what are the changes made in GDP calculation? This is a sort of points that you can get. This is an analysis. This is a run through those things that you must know. What were the different advantages of adopting new computation methodology? So once you know what changes have been made, a question can be asked, how is it helpful? If you change something, there is some anticipation of good things going to happen, right? Otherwise, you would not change an existing system unless you expect something good to come out of it. So what are the various advantages? So GVA provides a better picture of GDP, which is one of the major things, right? So this is a sort of argument that you have to give. Economic reflection, policy relevance, right? So a 4 or 5 points, crisp points on the changes that were made if a question is asked, and if you deliver, I think it's going to be a great answer. You will have impressed the examiner, and it will take less effort for the examiner to check your answers. Because see, examiner knows what he's looking for. If he finds that in a copy, you will get your marks. Otherwise, if we try to beat around the bush, it will sort of irritate the examiner and we might end up losing marks, right? Again, so now not everything is hunky-dory. We have made some changes. We have anticipated good things. There are advantages, definitely. But then as a UPSC aspirant, we always have to be impartial and neutral, and we have to give both sides of the argument, right? So there are certain issues also, right? So the MCA 21 database, for example, could not capture all the companies. So only 36% of the active companies are there in the MCA database, right? So earlier there was an ASI survey, but now there is an MCA data 21 data that is being used. So there are certain leakages in that. So base year discrepancies, for example, 11-12 is a base year, might not capture rapid economic changes, because with technology, AI, etc., I anticipate the economic development to increase by many folds. So maybe this base year could give a base year effect of being very low, and we could have over projected our growth. So that could be one of the disadvantages, right? So inclusion of informal sector, like we know homemakers, people who go to graze their cattle, they are not actively captured by GDP methodology, right? So that is also not a non-productive work. It also contributes a lot. For example, homemakers, we can always give this as an issue as a negative argument for GDP, that homemakers sort of enable us to, like our mothers, they help us to study and then go to work while they handle the household, which is a big responsibility. So in that sense, they are enabling us to contribute to the economy, so they must also be included in this calculation, but that is not being done, and many scholars also have spoken about it. So that can be one of the negatives, right? So we can give that in this issues pertaining to this thing wala argument. Okay, so apart from this, like I said, this included this year. What are the benefits of GDP, issues of GDP? Like, see, doesn't measure inequality, excludes non-market activities, quality of life is not measured, environmental pollution is not, captured in this, right? So there's a concept of green GDP now. So all these kind of things will sort of figure into this kind of a micro theme. So benefits, issues, positive, negatives, way forward for that matter. Other macroeconomic indicators are also something that we must study. Like I mentioned, budget, BOP, etc. So NDP, GNP, they might ask you what is this, how is it calculated. So these formulas are sometimes nice to be used in this paper. For example, like I said, GS3 is very technical in nature. It needs a shade of economics to sort of bring out the examiner and give you marks, right? So this, if you mention this, like if I was asked a question on what is GDP at market prices, I would write this formula as after my introduction, and I would just box it like this, just to bring out the visibility ki, okay, I know you want an economics answer, here is a formula, I know what I'm talking about. I would just label this as well, like this is investment, this is government expenditure, this is export, this is minus the import, like a nice schematic, diagrammatic explanation of that formula to tell the examiner that I know exactly what I'm talking about. I know the formula, it's just not some words written. There is a logic and I'm a well-informed person and I know what I'm talking about. So this will sort of give him an impression that this answer is going to be substantiated with relevant arguments, right? So these formulas, if you can put in your answers, this is sort of a validation. So well and good. So you might get some rewards for that. Then since you talked that GDP might not capture everything, what are the alternatives to GDP? This is another dimension that we can think about, right? So alternative GDP can be HDI, GPI, gross national happiness. Like for example, Bhutan uses this a lot. So you can give that argument. Green GDP, like I mentioned, inclusive wealth index, right? So these are the, if I had to give that, if the question was asked on GDP, I explained positive, I give an introduction, I wrote those formula with a schematic diagram, I wrote positives, I wrote negatives, then I would just sort of draw a small, diagram. Now the way I would do this is, in my answer is like when I'm coming towards the conclusion, what I would do is I would make alternatives to GDP like this, circle it and just make arrows and write GNP, NNH, green GDP, right, as a flowchart diagram towards the end of my answer, so that I don't even take too much space. I just visually explain the argument and at one glance you're able to understand this dimension, right? So this is also certain way of value adding to your answers. It can be very helpful. You can, but it'll only come with practice. So when we come to the delivery part, we can talk about how we can improve our answer writing on GS3 answers, right? So then potential GDP and different aspects of GDP are also captured here, right? So this is sort of how you will prepare your notes on GDP when you go to prepare that micro theme. Broadly explain it to you, it's not complicated. What is that thing? What is the formula? What does it imply? Then come to the analysis part. You will have the positives of that particular concept, negatives of that concept, few dimensions, interlinking with the other part of the syllabus, right? Then you will have what are the alternatives. Then you will have what is the way forward, how we can improve that calculation, how we can improve those data collection aspects, how we can reduce the leakages in that, etc. Right? Then you will have a particular section where you will collect your data facts and validation material. For example, for GDP, I would collect what is the GDP of the country, what is the growth rate that is slated for India, what is the recent RBI comment on GDP or Ministry of Finance, what it talks about GDP, World Bank predictions, IMF predictions, etc. can also be quoted in the introduction or the conclusion part just to give credibility to your arguments, right? A few diagrams on GDP, that formula on GDP. So just a very holistic preparation, airtight, so that no dimension is missed out, because you will be asked question on these things, and what they will not ask you very straightforward questions as in what is GDP, explain. No, they'll ask you GDP blah blah blah, but it is not an adequate capture of the development of a country, or GDP is such and such, but green GDP is effectively now in news and is very relevant. So explain what are the benefits of that. So these kind of questions will be asked. You must be prepared for it. So right. So we'll prepare dimensions, and this is how once we have these notes in hand and we revise them multiple times, we will then be very well equipped, right, to deliver content. So now once you've talked about the micro theme, we have prepared the micro theme, let's think about how we will write an answer. Okay, so just take a look at this question. One thing that I do when I read the question is I underline the keywords when I'm reading the question in the first instance, because this is one thing that I faced a lot when I used to practice, is that when you're giving the mains paper, you're sort of nervous. What you end up doing is you read one line and nothing goes in here. So you read one line over and over again compulsively. So we must avoid that. Try reading the question in one go, understanding carefully. A thing that you can do is to underline as you read, so that kind of you remember the keywords that you have to give the examiner, and you know that what is the demand of the question, so you don't go off track, right? For example, if I had to read this question in the context of heightened risks due to global concerns about economic policies and trade policy, uncertainties, need for strengthening the levers of domestic growth, then I would circle this question. So this is a statement. The real question is this: discuss. Now, for example, if it was critically analyze, then I know that I have to give a negative argument here as well, right? I will give a negative argument in discuss as well, but then I will, in critically analyze, there is a big scope for giving an argument of what are the negatives of that particular thing. So kind of understand the question. Don't spend 1.5, if this is a 10 marker, don't spend 1.5 page just explaining the context. That is the context for you to understand and sort of predict the demand of the question, right? So this is a discuss question, so it is very broad. You can't go very wrong here with the demand of the question. This is a basically a holistic coverage of the question being asked. So in discuss, what we will do is sort of give a context of the statement that they have given us, right? The context is heightened risk due to global concerns about economic and trade policies. So what are the global concerns? So any relevant and recent example on the global concerns and anything that you know about can be a relevant introduction. For example, Russia-Ukraine war, India-Pakistan conflict, right? China's actions in the South China Sea, Iran-Israel your conflict, okay? Israel-Palestine conflict. So anything of that nature which impacts the global economy is a valid introduction here. So you can prepare these introductions beforehand like we did in our notes, but then by giving a relevant introduction, we kind of bring the examiner up to date that yes, we have been aware of the current affairs and we sort of know what we're going to be talking about. So it's a good segue into your analytical arguments, the positive, negative that we're going to speak about. So it brings that kind of relevance to the answer. So here we have chosen to do in US-China trade war, right? Post the COVID disruptions, geo-economic fragmentation. I would box this term. See, because not everybody is very used to this. I'm not an economics student. I'm just an engineer, but still, I know the importance of keywords. Once you use technical terms and you sort of explain it in a sentence, it looks good. Especially in economics, if I were to use a nice economics term, it would kind of give that perception in my answer that this has a shade of economics and very relevant to GS3 paper, right? So, geo-economic fragmentation, protectionism, I would box this. Intensified global uncertainty for large emerging economies like India, blah, blah, blah. Okay? So, we have a nice relevant recent introduction to sort of go into the question that is being asked. Okay? So what is the global uncertainties and what is their impact on India, right? Because it's discussed, now we are just giving point wise arguments as to what is the global uncertainty. So fragmentation of trade, right? Volatile capital flows. Now look at the validation that is being done. This is the X factor that you need in your answer. Now just think about, I write this answer but I don't mention this point, right? I somehow don't write this part. Volatile capital flows, US Fed rate hikes have led to outflows from Indian market. This is just a statement, right? There is no you're not telling the examiner that you have actually read this in depth. But then look at this point in this manner. US Fed rate hikes have led to 1.2 lakh crores outflows from Indian market for the year 2024, right? This sort of gives this answer, this point, that X factor. Now I would go one step ahead and I would sort of write here as well where I got this data from. So if you mention your sources, nothing like it. For example, if this was 1.0, I would just write maybe, for example, I don't know, but if I could write RBI report, something here. I've taken this data from RBI report. It gives a much more visually appealing element to your answer, right? So volatile capital flows, supply chain. Supply chain is a good answer, argument recently. China plus one, this keyword. Another word that you can use is decoupling, delinking. These type of nice keywords and name dropping, these type of words also add that X factor to your GS3, right? Post rising energy prices. So we have a lot of points and dimensions to cover here. You obviously will know all these things when you study for this. I will not go into the content part. Just look at the way the answer has been written. Like for example, I would box this part. It's a nice data fact to sort of tell the amount of depreciation in the currency that has taken place. WTO deadlock, for example, right? So once we have these kind of validation materials in hand, we must be used to using them in our answers regularly. Now, how do you do this? We have to write this type of questions and keep answering them, practicing them in our answer writing, so that not just that we know our data fact validation material, we are habitual to purposely using it. Make an effort to write some kind of report or an example or a percentage or some kind of economic term or commission committee report in every point. Now, it's not going to be possible to do it in every single point, but the more you try, the better you get. So towards the end, I think you will be very well equipped to do that kind of a initiative, right? So I have done it myself, so I know that it's definitely possible. Again, a diagram is good. You can draw a diagram. I would personally also, if I had the time in the introduction part, I think a good argument is to I would sort of make a USA map. This is my South Africa. This is my Europe. This is India here. This is China. Okay? And maybe when we draw Africa here, sorry, my bad. If I draw your Middle East here and my Africa is here, then I would mark the global uncertainties region, like this Middle East area. Then I would draw this Russia, Ukraine. I would highlight this Russia, Ukraine part. I would highlight India, Pakistan part, South China Sea part, right? Trouble in Africa near this Gulf of Aden, etc. These places, Somalia, piracy, etc. This part, right? So I would draw the map with global uncertainties and then sort of make it one arrow. For example, India, Pakistan conflict, Israel Palestine conflict, Israel Iran conflict, right? So a nice visual depiction of the global uncertainties. Also, if you want to go one step ahead, and I think that will be a very good thing to do, is sort of you can make a small diagram here of showing the supply chains. Like you can draw an arrow here, say that oil exports, Indo-Pacific 90% of trade by volume. So that kind of gives that, okay, there are global uncertainties. This person has shown the global uncertainties, but at the same time, he's been able to depict what is the economic implication also of that thing in a diagram. So for example, the supply chain aspect, for example, if I draw from Russia, Ukraine, the Black Sea part, I can write impacting wheat exports, impacting fertilizer exports. So that is a very relevant diagram that you can make. And I think that would be very good in your answer. So that is just me thinking out loud. But yeah, that is something that I would have done probably, right? So then we come to the need for strengthening domestic levers. You can write the need. They have done it in a simple manner. I would write positives of that, negatives of that, and then conclude my way forward, right? So there are points here. There are schemes mentioned. Make sure that when you use a keyword or a scheme, you kind of box it, because that kind of brings out the visual appeal like this. You kind of box your points and relevant arguments. So that kind of gives that visual appeal to the answer. And then conclude with a positive point. I see that they've said that becoming increasingly unpredictable and self-sustaining growth strategy, etc. But then we must also write something positive in the end, that yes, despite global uncertainties, our economy has shown that resilience. We must engage in other global forums like we have done in the Mineral Security Partnership, for example, and other aspects of like UN, for example, to control these conflicts so that trade and economy and protectionism is not there, but there are other aspects such as free and open lines of credit and trade, and the Indo-Pacific is open for everybody to sort of maritime navigation, right? So that kind of a positive ending on a positive note would, I think, be a better strategy, right? So we have seen this question. Now I would like to show you one of the questions that I had written when I was preparing for the mains. This is a question on GDP, right? So it says the various methods used to calculate GDP and the reasons for disparity between GVA and GDP, right? So like I did, this is an economics question. he asked the various methods. So now it's the various methods for GDP, reasons for disparity between GDP and GVA, right? Now I have to show him exactly that I know what GDP is. So here is a verbatim definition of GDP is, right? So total value, all final, I've underlined this point because it's very important. This is a technical term. Goods and services produced in the territory of India within a final fixed time period, usually 1 year. So three things have to be captured: a fixed time period, geographical territory area, and final goods and products, right? So I've sort of shown him that I know what GDP is. Then look at the part of the question, right? It said various methods. This was a keyword. This is a demand of the question. My heading is exactly taken from the question verbatim. So when the examiner reads this, he knows, okay, my question is being answered. It's not a vague heading. Make your headings also extremely relevant. Just pick them from the question. Please do not use new words. It sort of gives this idea that you have gone astray from the demand of the question. We have to stick to the demand. So use the terms given in the question itself. So methods used. Then there are, when you study your static, there is income methods. I used a flowchart kind of arrow-based method to sort of explain that topic. And this is the expenditure method, right? In that there is a formula, like I mentioned. The formula I would have used. So I've mentioned the formula here, and now I've shown them with arrows what it means. So this is at one glance, you know that what this formula means, the various factors in that formula, right? How it's calculated. So capital, government expenditure, incomes. So you basically have shown how it's being calculated. Then your GVA method, right? Again, a schematic flowchart kind of approach to show that the value added is just being added, and then you show it with the formula or diagram. You explain it in short terms, and you explain it with the help of a diagram, right? And then the second part of the question was to show the disparity between GVA and GDP. Same exact heading, so that you know that I have given that part, and then you show with the formula. So I tried to do the best I could in that 7 minutes. But yeah, so I boxed this whatever I could think I thought was relevant, and then give my conclusion, right? So this is how you would go about economics. We have covered it broadly. So in agriculture, total count of questions have been seen 42. It's a pretty high number, and the main syllabus is also quite detailed for that, right? So now again, taking the leaf from the previous approach itself, have the microthemes in front of you, so you know what you have to study. You know what you have to study much more than other subjects. For example, agri finance and subsidies should be much more prioritized over horticulture. It goes without saying, right? And not that we should not study horticulture, but just the time that you would give focusing on the return of investment, because it's a GS3 paper. So you can sort of know what to prioritize, right? So there are different aspects in this agriculture part, right? So agriculture finance and subsidies has seen the highest, right? Land reforms is there, marketing, agriculture marketing, cropping patterns is very important. Cropping patterns is very important. And then again, like I said, don't draw restrictions across GS papers. What you have studied for GS in GS1 in geography, cropping patterns and different type of crops grown across India, that diagram will come very handy here. You can use it most definitely. There is no restriction there, right? So be flexible across papers, right? So then technology in agriculture, right? Organic farming, millets, very relevant and current affair based, right? Integrated farming system, crop diversification. So a lot of themes are very repetitive, not because it's there in GS3, but because it is in GS1 as well, right? Crop diversification, millets is something you will study in geography as well when you study your cropping patterns and soils, etc. So don't be hesitant to use that content here. Just be very flexible and use that material as a content value addition in your GS3, right? So we can pick up a different micro theme to study. So for example, how would I make notes on technology used in agriculture? Like, okay, so technology in agriculture, production and marketing, right? So they have asked, look at the nature of the question. After we choose a micro theme to study, we know what micro themes are being asked. We will first look at the PYQ. How does e-technology help farmers in production and marketing of agriculture produce? Now, what is this question asking us? What is this telling us? What is UPSC telling us to study and prioritize? How is technology helping farmers in production and marketing? So technology helping farmers because it's agriculture. Very well, what can be asked is next. Helping government study the progress on agriculture. Okay. Who else is involved? Maybe your private companies who are investing in contract farming, private players, consumers, the buyers, right? So the buyers of the produce, right? So a lot of people are involved in agriculture, and technology is one of the aspects. Now we need to open dimensions on how to prepare. So how technology is helping different players and different stakeholders in the processes. Now in production, in marketing. Now let's just think about it. The key technology can be asked in terms of how it is helping anybody, any player in maybe post sowing season, post sowing, pre sowing, right? Before harvesting, once it is in the mandis, like this is like marketing aspect again, right? So a different phase wise approach on how technology is helping at what layer. So this is how they are going to basically make the question as well. They know that they have to ask technology in agriculture. Now they're going to ask you different permutation combinations. They can take a different player and a different time scale, right? Post harvest, pre harvest, etc. And who is it helping? Private players, government, farmers, maybe your buyers, consumers at the end level, how it's impacting prices, right? So this is sort of theme that they're asking. So we have to dimensionalize on how is technology being used, what are the different aspects of it, right? Positives, negatives of that, what are the different players in that scenario, how is it technology helping them, what can be done better, some validation material on data, fact, or the current progress of agriculture, or some committee recommendation on that, right? That can be prepared, and then way forwards, like what is the improvements that we can sort of make. Okay, so this is how we'll kind of make our notes. So just let's get into how we would sort of make our notes. It's very similar to the previous approach. So agriculture, technology, and marketing is a topic, and for example, now there are going to be different dimensions of that topic, right? So we have storage of agriculture produce. So now technology, how is it going to be used in storage? Now, for example, we know that once the produce is being sold, there is a lot of risk of diversification towards the black market, etc. So now we know that GPS-enabled tracking of these trucks has been done. This is a use of technology in sort of reducing the leakages, right? We can give whoever is coming to store in our facilities certain kind of tokens based on blockchain, so that they are immutable, and then the record of how much grain was stored where cannot be altered. So that is a kind of a check on the system that grains are not being taken out and sold without any permission or in the black market, right? So firstly, talk about the capacity. A lot of data fact is given here. 1.5 million metric tons is the capacity, but production is at 311. So we must memorize these things so that we put in our arguments, right? Then the need for storage and warehousing. Then this is the analysis part, right? So what is the negatives, challenges in that? So over dependence, APMC monopoly. So these are the content that you know. But then what we must get from this is this data. 60% of cold storage capacity is concentrated just in 4 states. Now, I would like to bring out a very important point. Like when we study these notes, or for that matter, our mock questions, right, and see the answers, they're not always just to give you question answers and feedback, or just test your capabilities. They can sometimes serve as a source of content enrichment as well. You can't study everything from a book. You can't get everything at one place. So sometimes when you give tests and you see the keys, those keys can serve as very important aids to getting some kind of conceptual clarity, or enriching your own knowledge so that you write a better answer, right? So make sure that, for example, if I would see this here, I would make a note in my diary as well that 60% of cold storage is only in one place. Like for example, I didn't know that fact, but now once I see this kind of a resource material, I know that yes, okay, this is something that I can definitely use. It looks good in my answer, and it gives credibility that I know. I just can't go and say that there is no cold storage availability. That is something that an armchair person can also say. So, but when you give some credible data, 60% cold storage capacity is there based on a CAG report. Now it is given in stone, right? Set in stone, because nobody's going to go and question the CAG report. It has done it must have some basis behind it, right? But when we just give an opinion, it kind of looks odd. So that is one thing that we must keep in mind. Issues related to whatever the process is, procurement, storage, right? Pests, damage to crops, rats, etc. And steps taken to improve, which is the kind of a positive aspect, because we saw the negative earlier. So PSL, etc., PACS, cooperative societies have come about. Another thing that you can mention is that there is a provision of giving J forms to people who are coming to store their grains. So that J forms is kind of an innovative approach which helps them finance their next sowing period better once they have got the grain stored and before it is being sold into the market. And then your way forward is definitely good to write these two committees. Everybody knows this Shanta Kumar committee and Ashok Dalwai committee recommendations. So right, you can mention them, you can write few points based on that, and it will look excellent in your answer, right? Then your transport of agricultural produce, government schemes, way ahead, etc. Same approach. Check the theme, know something about the introduction part, make something, prepare something, get data, fact validation, committee commendations that we had, analyze that topic, make different dimensions of that topic, have the positives ready, have the negatives ready, right? Have the way forward ready, and then have a good conclusion ready. I mean, I think if you have this kind of an approach prepared for any topic for that matter in the GS, I don't think you will have any problem in answering any questions. It's just that by practicing answer writing, you will have prepared, have gotten the skill of sometimes answering a question on the spot when they interlink 2 or 3 dimensions. So you have both all the 3 dimensions prepared separately, but that interconnection part of how to frame your sentence so that it seems as if you're connecting them and answering the question is a skill that you have to develop with the help of practicing answer writing and giving content regularly, right? So like again, marketing, significance of marketing, issues pertinent to markets, right? Reduce committees, APMC, etc., etc. So a lot of dimensions are given here. You can prepare from this resource as well and sort of make your preparation foolproof, right? So let's look at a question of how we would answer that. Now, again, I'm going to show you how I read the question. Now, stagnant agricultural productivity. So stagnant productivity in India is less a technological failure and more a governance failure. More a governance failure. Now, this is something that you must underline because you don't have to talk about the technological failure more. You have to talk about the governance failure more. This is a very fine line here. I will explain it again. So they're asking you, do you agree? This is the main question. I would box this. Also, provide the roadmap for bridging the agricultural technology gap in India. The roadmap for bridging technology gap in India, right? Now, I have seen a lot of people who sometimes don't realize what is the demand of the question. Now, this is a good example to see that. Stagnant agricultural productivity in India is less a technological failure and more a governance failure. Now, it seems as a very nice statement, but then what people tend to do is they talk more about this part than this part. You are expected to talk more about the fact that it's a governance failure, not more about that it's a technological failure, right? But people start writing more that it's why it is less a technological failure, which is what you have to avoid. Give a short line, few lines on why it is less a technological failure and talk more about the aspect of the governance failure, right? And then you have to give your opinion on that. So how would you give your opinion? You will not say, yes, it is totally true and then this is it. No. The way we will approach this question is we'll give arguments for yes, why the statement is correct, no, why the statement could be wrong, and then briefly, very subtly, you have to give an opinion that yes, there are issues in that because what we have, after analyzing both positives and negatives, it seems as if the issue is on both sides. And definitely, since you cannot end on a negative note, please give the way forward on how you are going to improve that. Because like I said, as a civil servant, you are expected to give answers. You are supposed to tell what should be done and how it should be done and how you can definitely make it better. That is the expectation from you in the question paper. So that is something that you'll give. And also provide the roadmap for bridging the technological gap, which is again asking you, it's a kind of a way forward. From our notes, if you have prepared technology in agriculture, then how to make it better is going to be very well prepared in your way forward aspect of your notes, right? So again, nice introduction with data fact, 3.9%, 4.3%, etc. So I would again do this here. Box my data fact, and then this is nicely given in the economic survey. So underline this so that he knows that I have mentioned my source as well, right? Gradual stagnation. Okay, so then we'll talk about why, very briefly, we should talk about why it's a lesser technological failure. So, I mean, this part can be avoided because this is basically content giving. So again, like I said, these test copies and these mock answers are kind of a good way to get your data fact also. It's kind of a content generation. But I would give the heading here, why it is less technological failure, and then give 5 points, right? So they're given a few schemes and things like that here. then I would say why it is more a governance failure. My heading would be this. I would directly take the statement and the language from the question itself. Then I would give these dimensions that they have mentioned here. Governance failures hindering technology adoption, right? Failure, political, institutional, blah, blah, blah. Maybe you can make a diagram, circular diagram, hub and spoke diagram to sort of give that answer there. Then I would write how it can be made better, right? So these are the issues there. Roadmap to bridge the aggregation. So this is the way forward here. So I would write way forward, or maybe, yeah, you can directly use the statement of the question itself. Roadmap to bridge the technology gap. So a lot of nice technological points. Since it's technology, it's a question on technology in agriculture. Make sure that you give technological aspects primarily. Like, don't start talking about give direct benefit transfer and give schemes and like fertilizers should be better. Nothing like that. It's on technology. And I'm telling you this because we tend to get very excited when we get a question on something that we know, and then we just get overwhelmed and we have to write everything that we know. So we kind of miss track. But this is very specific to technology. So write how to bridge the gap based on technological solutions, not other aspects in agriculture that you can also make better. There is a scope to do a lot of things in agriculture better, marketing, etc., etc. But technology should be the primary argument behind this. So like AI-based apps, Kisan GPT, Digital India, Aadhaar KVC, blockchain. Nicely box these points. It looks good and give a lot of visibility to your answer, right? This is something I would really love to see in an answer. Brazil's MRAPA model. What a diverse point, right? What a very unique point. Not many people will be writing this, so this is very nice. In fact, I would not write this here. I would write this Brazil's MRAPA model here as a keyword and then interchange these two things here. Because I want examiner to see at the first glance Brazil's MRAPA model, because I think it looks unique and I think it gives this impression that this person has studied a little differently. So that kind of an edge, if you want, one mark can change the destiny. So this is something I would do, right? So geotagging, underline, drones, satellite imagery, underline, right? Agriculture tech adoption index, again an index is mentioned. So this is basically how you deliver content and maybe bring so much value to your answer, right? After that, a nice conclusion. Always end on a positive note or be solution oriented, not problem oriented. So I would write maybe your initiatives that are being done in technology, how we can get them to the farmers much more accessible, right? So business correspondents or like working with civil society is an aspect I sometimes feels is very underrated. You know, not many people express in their answers that the need to work with civil society on ground, or you can also bring a very good dimension of working with local self-government groups. Panchayats are the grassroots level democracy, right? We cannot actually make good changes unless we go down to the levels of the grassroots and make those, implement those changes. So always mention that factor also as well. It will give your answer a nice touch of it'll be a very realistic answer. That's what I feel, right? So by mentioning this in the conclusion that by engaging with civil society, by engaging with your panchayats, by helping them train themselves in the use of technology, we can certainly ensure that the farmers have access to your technological products and they are able to use them effectively to improve the state of agriculture in India. So civil society and local self-government, please make sure that you use them in your answers. It looks very good, right? So that is sort of the thing, approach with your agriculture. So broadly, how to make those notes, those different dimensions, and then how to deliver content in the question, right? Let's look at environment, which is the third part, right? So pollution and mitigation of that pollution is going to be the highest winner here, with the highest amount of questions being asked from environment part of the syllabus, right? Environment impact assessment as it is given the syllabus. I mean, there are 7 steps to that. You must know each step, like your scoping, screening, blah blah blah. You should know all these steps very well. If a question comes on EIA, if you're not mentioning those 7 steps back like verbatim, I'm not sure that you're going to get the marks for that question at all, because that's essentially what they're going to be testing. So make sure that you have those things rote learned and very well memorized, right? And you have mining, erosion, wetlands, very important. If you recall, there was a question there that wetlands are the kidneys of the ecosystem, etc., right? So what does it mean? So that is important, right? Climate change, again, very, very important. Cannot be ignored and cannot be stressed enough upon, especially if you live in Delhi. So climate change is very real, and a lot of questions will be asked on that. In fact, this is my prediction that climate change will be a very hot topic in your environment, right? So biodiversity, river linking impact, More or less all these things will be covered with current affairs as well. One of the things with GS3 paper is that you have to be very up to date with the current affairs. See, mains paper is going to be very relevant. It's not going to be very contextual or theoretical or textbookish. It's going to be something based on ground of what is happening. For example, in your climate change part of the environment, it's not going to be asking you very static questions. They might ask that, but it's always going to be something very relevant in the recent events. Like UNFCCC conference has happened. Okay, IPCC reports have come about. What do they say? Right? Some convention or some protocol has happened. Some update has taken place. Montreal Protocol, Kyoto Protocol, right? Kigali Amendment. So all these things are going to be very relevant. So you must know what those are, and you have to prepare them that way, right? So these are the broad themes: renewable energy, IPCC reports. Oh, I mentioned it as a theme itself. Electrical vehicles, right? Technology, science and tech linked with environment gives you electrical vehicles. That aspect, ecosystem, right? So from that aspect, let's take pollution and see what's the scene, right? So look at the question that being asked in your pollution part of the environment. Very, very current affair based, very relevant, right? Something based on the Gothenburg Protocol, right? Something related to photochemical smog, right? Phenomenons in the environmental syllabus, right, is going to be very important, like wetlands, kidneys of the ecosystem, heavy metals, leaching, photochemical smog, right? Radiation. So all these aspects which are polluting the environment and are often seen. Something like they can ask you a question on stubble burning. Like stubble burning is very relevant in India at this point of time. It's very current affair based. What is the developments on that? How we can mitigate that? Sort of these kind of aspects can also be asked, right? So photochemical smog and they're asking to explain the formation, effects, and mitigation. So you have to know what type of pollution phenomenon it is. You have to know how it is formed. You have to know the concepts behind the formation of that, maybe some chemical concepts as well, chemical reactions that take place, right? They can also have the stratospheric clouds, right? How they are formed, etc. That can also be asked. And then you obviously will prepare how to mitigate that and what are the conventional protocols, etc. on that. Okay? Look at this again. Revised global air quality guidelines. This must have been in the current affairs at that time because it's revised, right? National Clean Air Program. Again, some initiative must have been in the news, right? Then you can also see a static subject, static question. It's not that they will not ask that, but they are little rare because environment is a very happening and updated field, right? So what is oil pollution? Impacts on marine ecosystem. Way oil pollution particularly harmful for a country like India. So you will obviously study the different types of pollution when you go for studying environmental pollution and mitigation aspect. Noise pollution, air pollution, water pollution, light pollution, right? Radiation, etc. So you will have studied all these things. So you will obviously be very well aware of this question. It's just a question in the hands, right? Yeah. So e-waste also is very important. I'm not able to find a question on e-waste directly here, but yeah, e-waste is very relevant in today's time, especially with the use of smartphones, etc. And a lot of important minerals can be salvaged from that e-waste. So they can ask you a question like, what is the state of e-waste in India? What is the government policy on e-waste? The national e-waste policy, what does that say? And how can we make it better? What is the advantage of that? How is the process of extracting important metals from that e-waste going to be helpful to India particularly and globally as well? So that is somehow the way in which I would think if I had to prepare environmental pollution based on the previous year questions. That is what the feeling that is the feeling that I get, and I sort of now have an idea of what dimensions and what aspects are important. So commissions, your protocols, okay, international forum based things like UNFCCC or IPCC reports, right? Protocols like Gothenburg Protocol, Kyoto Protocol. So now I would go and study all the protocols just because I want to be prepared. If they ask me a question on this, I have to be ready with what that protocol is in my introduction, maybe a diagram on what are the different salient aspects of that protocol, and then answer the question. So then now that we have prepared those things, we will have prepared all those aspects like we have seen in the previous topics as well. We now know how to make those notes. So we'll not go into that again, but we'll look at a question, right? So plastic pollution is choking our oceans, harming marine life and entering our food chain. Good statement. They're asking you to evaluate the efficacy of various national and international initiatives of plastic management. Now look at this. Even if I don't even read this statement, you should be able to answer that question. What mistake people make is they talk more about this point and forget this point, the second point. So if this is 1 and this is 2, they talk more about 1 and then forget about, write very little about 2. The marks are for the second part. The first one is just giving you context. It is not as if you have to ignore point number 1. We have to talk about point number 1, but you have to give a very brief introduction on that and show the examiner that I got what you're trying to ask me. Now look at the answer that I've written based on the second aspect, right? So that is how you would go about answering this question, right? So plastic pollution is choking our ocean, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So plastic pollution is the main aspect here. Our oceans are being choked, it's harming the marine life and food chain. Food chain, marine life, oceans. Okay, it's harming. And now we have to evaluate efficacy of different various national and international initiatives of plastic management. Two-part question, right? So now they have given an introduction here. It's based on a quote. I would much rather prefer this introduction where we have write 80% of marine litter box this enters ocean annually. I would also like to have a source on this. For example, if it is from, I'm just giving an example, I'm not sure where this is from. For hypothetically, if this is from your UNEP report, then I would bracket here and write UNEP report 2024 or something like that, just to give credibility that this data is not taken from some random source, it is a credible source, right? So that is how I would write that. Then I would come to the pollution impact part. So now because this is a mock answer, they have given content here, and that's why I feel like this kind of a question answer format is a good source, not just for practicing answer writing, it's also a nice place to get content on very specific things. Now, for example, if I had to study plastic pollution, rather than studying it from a big book, when I have just 70 days for the mains exam, why not just read this mock answer and prepare it from here itself? Because so many good points are given here with data, facts and your validation, right? So it'll save my time. I'll study that topic within 5 minutes and have multiple dimensions covered, right? So they're talking about the environment impact on the oceans, right? Marine diversity, because you can see there were 3 aspects here, right? There were 3 parts of this question: oceans, marine life, food chain. So make sure you address each of them briefly. So marine biodiversity, human health because of food chain, and oceans, right? After that, you have to evaluate the national and international initiatives taken on plastic, right? A few good data facts. The ocean cleanup initiative is something that you can mention as an example, just to give value. UNEP report, like I mentioned, you can write that in the diagram. Also, please make sure that you keep boxing these things, because this is your X factor, right? You have prepared very hard to find these unique points and unique data, facts and validation material. Make sure you box them. If you are writing it, might as well get some benefit out of it, right? Make the examiner, force the examiner to see your answer, force them to see these unique points that you have given by boxing them. Okay, so this is what you're going to basically get your marks for. Everything down here is going to be the chunk of your marks, right? So national measures, I would write this keyword because this is my number 1 thing. But I would box this keyword, then draw a dash and then explain this point in very short, underline, right? So this is how you'll write to give your points here in keyword format. Write the point, write the keyword, draw a line, explain that in 1 or 2 sentences, and end with an example or a data fact or a committee or a commission report. This is my general approach when I write answer point wise, right? So different aspects are given here. You can just pick up things from here as well, like Swachh Sagar, Surakshit Sagar campaign. Now, what a good point to write. What a good national initiative to sort of tackle your pollution. Okay? So you can write these points, initiatives. Maybe something that is being done by civil society as well can be mentioned here, right? So I'll give some addition to your answers. Then international measures, because national and international both were asked, make sure you address both. UN Convention, UN Clause, Law of the Sea, etc. Underline, box these points, London Convention, etc. Right? Now, definitely, since we spent too much time, too much space in the first part, which you can just briefly address, you could also have space to write the shortfalls and what can be done better. Okay? So it's obviously true that these initiatives are not completely working, right? There must be some shortfalls as well. So here they have mentioned positive parts, positive impacts of these measures, which is very important. You must mention this. This will really give credibility to the initiative that you have taken, so that the examiner knows you're not just taking names, you know the impacts behind these measures, and it's giving some enrichment to your arguments. Write the positives, okay? Few points. Limitations have been mentioned, write the negatives also, and then you also have to end with the way forward. So proposed solutions, I would rather write way forwards or how to improve those policies better. So box this heading here and give your, so great keyword here, circular economy. Even the Prime Minister had talked about this, so it's a very good keyword to use. 6 hours framework, wonderful. Box it again, and maybe draw a diagram like this and write those answers, those points here, so that you save space, right? Because if you write point wise 6, I'll take a lot of space here. Might as well just write from here itself by drawing the diagram and mentioning these points, 6 hours, right? Then improved waste collection and management throughout investment and recycling, blah blah blah. Okay, so you have a lot of content here. Let's not go into that, but then I'm just showing you how to highlight your keywords and have these kind of keywords as the first part after you write the question point number, so that when I just read that point, I know what it is talking about, right? I don't have to spend time in reading a statement and figuring out what it is exactly talking about. So yeah, so then great conclusion here. Mission life, very very important for India, and a great initiative is being taken. Box that, so that we know that it's about environment and we're ending on a positive note. And it is showing the aspect of that, it's showing the aspect that by adopting such principles in daily life, even people like you and me can contribute to reducing that pollution. It's not just talking about national, we talked about national, international measures, but then coming down to the grassroots level, coming down to the individual level, towards the conclusion, I think is a beautiful way to conclude that answer. So in that sense, I think these kind of, case studies or individual efforts, somebody's taking, some environmentalist is undertaking some effort, can be a good end to that conclusion, to that answer, right? So this is your broadly environment pollution environment part. This is how you will study, get the microthemes in order, prepare them holistically, full-fledged, and then practice content delivery and know how to structure that answer and deliver content, right? We will go to the security part, right? Again, security is as well going to be similarly, we have different aspects of that. Border management, crime, terrorism, cybersecurity, LWE, role of media, right? So there are a lot of dimensions in security. So border area management, highest questions. Organized crime and terrorism is one of the highest questions. LWE, role of media and social networking. So now we basically know what we have to study and how we have to study. So again, take a micro theme, multiple dimensions, cover all of them, positive, negatives, analysis, data, facts, and then good way forwards that you must prepare, and conclusions should be ready. So that is that going to be for security. A lot of questions are asked here, so don't give lesser efforts here. 48 questions if I remember correctly, so be ready with that, right? So security notes have to be in this kind of order: an introduction, external non-state actors, some technical terms, definitions, role of those actors, right? Challenges, examples are going to be very helpful in security. For example, Pulwama attack here as an example, fake currency, FICN notes, right? Yangtze clash, China, Bangladesh. You can make it internal security country wise, because we fight a 2.5 front war, right? So LWE, China and Pakistan, you should prepare especially and make them country specific as well, right? The challenges that we face with them. Okay, so just cover all the dimensions of internal security: the economic aspect, political aspect, social aspect, technological aspect. Technological aspect in internal security is going to be very relevant now, especially with the warfare regarding drones and pager attack done by Israel. So very very relevant and can be asked. So Redico, cyber security is also a very big important aspect nowadays. Space also is a new frontier. So prepare these all things very well, right? So your notes will be in this kind of manner. So prepare them well and have multiple dimensions prepared for internal security. Alternatively, what you can do is figure out all the internal security challenges that we are facing currently in whichever state and focus on them, and open multiple dimensions there and prepare your notes, right? Along with some data fact that you can find anywhere, right? So for example, I really like to use Ministry of Home Affairs website to see the initiatives that we are taken for the LWE affected areas. So you'll find a lot of initiatives mentioned there. For example, the media policy on how media can be helping us in tackling LWE. So awareness programs, so education wise Roshni scheme, etc. You'll find out a lot of that things in your Ministry of Home Affairs website under the schemes part. So that's a good resource you might be interested in going through that. Right. So I think internal security works very well with diagrams. So for example, if you look at this question, changing tactics of terrorist organizations and drug traffickers have exacerbated the challenge of narco-terrorism, necessitating a comprehensive risk mitigation approach. Again, discuss. So it's going to be a very broad approach. So we're going to define what narco-terrorism is, right? Changing tactics is the first part of the question, so we're going to write about that. Now, this is a diagram that I always use, and they've mentioned it here also. So I really like this diagram because it explains in one go what is the problem about narco-terrorism, especially with regarding to India, right? Northeast India point. So multiple dimensions you'll have covered. When you study narco-terrorism, you will know that you have to, think about narco-terrorism from Indian angle, global angle. You'll know what places it comes from, what are the implications of that, how it is connected to drug money, organized crime, terrorism, how narco-terrorism helps in, helping terrorists fund themselves, get arms, ammunitions, etc. So these are the type of things, linkages that you'll have to make and prepare them, right? So maritime, smuggling of narcotics, right? For example, in Gujarat, the port, we found a ship from Iran which had a lot of heroin in it. So how that is going to impact our internal security infrastructure or scenario. So that is something also you can alternatively think about. So you have to brainstorm on what are the different dimensions regarding internal security. Pick one topic, for example, terrorism, LWE, border clashes, border management, cyber security, infrastructure security, right? So prepare them, and these aspects of analysis, positives, negatives, way forward, and validation. Is that something that you'll be doing throughout? Challenges again mentioned here, comprehensive risk mitigation, which is again your way forward, and then you'll conclude with a good conclusion. For example, some initiative that the government is taking, or some other aspects that we can do, or some partnership or global forum that we can join to sort of get more better at that. Okay, so apart from internal security, then we have our science and tech. Again, a small topic, but can be very rewarding. So space tech, biotech, right? Medical technologies, achievements of Indians, right? So we know the micro themes and we can prepare them. Data protection is very important these days. Nanotech, okay? It's not mentioned here, but then I feel a few topics that we must cover is AI should be covered more, because I think its number of questions will be increasing in the coming days, right? Quantum computing, quantum is very important. Space technologies, not just space missions like your satellites, etc., but space technologies, right? Life materials, semiconductors, chips. For example, Nvidia came out with this B2 chip, H2 chip, whatever Blackwell chip that we have made. So that was in the news. So in fact, Microsoft has recently come about with that new method of quantum technology, right, which had come in the prelims paper. So might as well go and read a little more about it. It could be asked as a mains question as well, to explain the process, how they did that in that manner. So that can be a possible question. So based on these topics, we have the micro themes. It's going to be very difficult to cover science and tech totally, but when we know the themes that have been repeatedly asked, our job can be done better, and we might definitely be able to answer more or less all the questions that are asked on science and tech based on some kind of situational awareness in the paper on what kind of content we have to deliver. But then, yeah, by studying these micro themes, we will make our job more easier, right? So let's look at a question on science and tech. What are Lagrange points? Describe the objectives of ISRO L1 mission. Additionally, discuss the significance of exploring the sun. Now, I have written this question myself also and show you my answer as well. But then, what are Lagrange points? Very, very, very crisp question. Very easy to understand the demand. Firstly, explain what is the concept of Lagrange points. Now, after that, describe the objective of ISRO's L1 mission, Aditya L1 mission. And then additionally, discuss the significance of exploring the sun. Now, this is some kind of question that even I have written. I'll show you the answer. But then, very easy to answer this question. Just break the dimension. Like, for example, what are the Lagrange points as mentioned here? The objectives will be given below of Aditya L1, and then the significance of exploring the sun is given. So now you have studied a geography also. Like, again, you cannot answer this question just by studying science and tech. You might not even have read this point. But if you have studied geography and the space part, then you would know what Lagrange points are, right? You know about solar flares. You know about coronal mass ejections. You know that it damages the satellites. So these are the points that you'll have to write here as well. So don't be stuck to one paper, one content, etc. Be fluid across papers, and that's how you'll be able to value add to your answers. So what is Aditya? This diagram is especially very, very important. I mean, if you can draw this diagram, there will be no doubt left in the mind of the examiner that you know what Lagrange points are, right? So because you have studied this point, it just shows. Go over the objectives of the L1 mission, significance of exploring the sun in crisp points, and then conclude with the purpose of the Aditya L1 mission, for example, that how it is going to help us, what it's going to place India in one of the top countries that have sent space missions to the sun, right? And how that is going to help in other aspects of science and tech, for example, can help in research on biomedical science, right? So these kind of points you can give as a positive way forward. So I have also written this question. I had the paucity of time, so I could not write a very elaborate answer, but in the mains paper also, you will be facing that paucity of time. So I just mentioned this introduction on this question, what it is going to do, drew the diagram very briefly, wrote the importance of the respect to the sun. So help us study the origin of the solar system, right? Study coronal mass ejections, study of solar storms, study the black spots on the sun, study the solar cycle, study solar atmosphere, nuclear fission reactions, so whatever that is going to help us study. And then I give a conclusion that why it is important. So if you can give a lot of content, a lot of crisp points, I think it impresses the examiner that you have awareness of the subject and you know what you're talking about. Right? And coming to the final part of the GS3 paper, which is your disaster management. See, disaster management is also going to be very relevant to the current affair things that are going to take place, right? So, for example, if we had landslides in Kerala, a question had directly come in the mains paper relating to landslides. So, if there is an avalanche, if there is a forest fire in Australia, right? If there are plane crashes, which are unfortunately happening, then we must be aware of what to do in that situation as well, because these kind of questions are going to be very current affair based, right? So one of the good resources that I think I would always recommend everybody to go and see is go to the NDMA website and check out the way in which we must respond in case of a natural disaster. For example, cyclones, earthquakes, etc. They have given crisp points, 5 to 6 points on every disaster and what is the way that we are going to tackle them and what are the procedures to be followed. So once you add them to your notes, you will be saying what essentially the NDMA has in mind. And that will be the most authentic source to answer on a disaster management question. So for example, we have to prepare disaster wise, right? So I have taken the example of a landslide here because it was very relevant. So prepare a disaster like this, landslides. Now again, see how much linked it is with your GS1. This is basic geography, right? Downward movement of rock along a slope under the influence of gravity. You have to know this and you have to use it from the GS1 to GS3 paper as well, right? Then you'll prepare a data. Now, this kind of data is very good. 12.6% of land area is prone to landslides. It gives you the importance of landslide mitigation because a lot of our country's area is under the influence of that, is prone to landslides. So we must be ready for it. Himalayan region accounts for 30% of global landslides, right? So this kind of data fact is very helpful in enriching your answer. Apart from that, you will write landslide vulnerability zones. They can ask you earthquake vulnerability zones, right? So zones 1 to 5, etc. You have to draw the map of India and sort of plot them on that map. It looks very good, visually appealing, right? Landslide vulnerability zones here, types of landslides, okay, another geographical dimension here, criteria to declare, why would government declare a landslide? So there's certain technical points, okay, causes of landslides, natural causes, there will be man-made causes, right, anthropogenic causes, impacts of that on human life or the environment, a few crisp points there. What are the government initiatives that are being taken place, okay? And what we can do to mitigate that. And like I said, NDMA guidelines they have given here, so great. These are something that you should definitely mention, and mention there that you are mentioning the NDMA guidelines. So it gives more credibility to your answer. NDMA guidelines, do's, don'ts, and way forward, right? So a lot of dimensions: do's, don'ts, way forward, analysis, geographical backing of how it happens, what is the reason for a landslide, and how we can mitigate that. Also, please prepare examples of landslide because they have been asking these questions. For example, they ask, give the names of dam failures, mention the names of where dam failures had happened, active volcanoes, tsunamis, where was the last tsunami done in the last, where was the last tsunami that took place in the last 10 to 15 years. So they ask you very relevant names of these incidents as well. So please be prepared with that as well. So once you're prepared with those dimensions, just look at the question. Recent landslide in Kerala, warning of perils, ignoring ecology and science and development planning. So very broad question again. Again, we introduce with a nice data report, IPCC 6th assessment report. I would box this again. 30% increase in India in extreme disaster events. Great introduction, sustainable and sustainable development, right? You mentioned that. It's a good segue into your argument. Now you're going to write about the unsustainable and unsustainable development, right? Because we have ignored ecology, as the question is saying. So give keywords: unplanned urbanization, economic impact assessment is not happening properly. You can give example in the Greater Andaman Development Project also there were claims of that being happening. So you can mention an example there as well. extensive mining and quarrying, fragile ecosystems, unsustainable water management practices, and climate change. So environmental aspects of this question have to be mentioned. So because you're writing an environment-based answer, make sure that you use in terms that are often repeated in the environment content as well, right? So climate change, unsustainable water management practices, fragile ecosystem, these look good in your answer and look relevant. So you write impacts of such unscientific in the form of increasing disasters. Draw this diagram if you want to. It's a good validation material. Human loss, economic losses, infrastructure damages, right? And then obviously this answer is not complete without mentioning the way forward, because this is essentially what the examiner is looking for. Everybody knows that there is problem in the environment. We are not paid much attention to ecology, and that's why these disaster events have happened. That everybody knows. You have given some nice data and fact on that, but now what we are looking from you is to give a solution. So what is the way forward is going to be very important. Box this, right? This is excellent. Gadgil and Kasturi Rangan committee, very relevant to the Western Ghats, and Kerala, as you know, is part of that. So these committee reports are exceptionally important. In fact, if I had to do something, I would just write way forward. One, I would write Gadgil committee reports and write whole 3-4 points on what they have said. Then Kasturi Rangan report committee, and I would write again 4-5 points on this. And then I would give the sort of more general answers on the way forwards, like promoting sustainable agriculture practices, large scale afforestation, community awareness and preparedness is going to be very important, because this is something that we're going to do at the ground level, right? And then a case study or a principle like Prakriti Rakshati Rakshita, something of a positive nature, to show that we must conserve the environment. We have to work with local communities and help in disaster mitigation and adaptation very well, right? So this is going to be a very holistic answer, and this is going to give value to your answer as well, with the mention of number of committees and data, facts, and examples, right? So this is how broadly we're going to cover the GS3 paper. I hope this was of value, and just a basic approach. Now we know the micro themes, we know the sub micro themes. We look at the PYQs, we understand what is relevant, we make dimensions ourselves and predict what is going to be asked, so that we know how to prepare as well. Then we have seen how the notes have to be made with different analysis, positive, negative, data, facts, dimensions, introduction, conclusions, scholar reports, etc. Right? And then we practice answer writing by delivering content as per the requirement of the question, by boxing important parts, underlining important keywords, and writing the headings as per the language of the question, so that we ensure that the examiner knows that we are staying on topic and not deviating from the demand of the question. So this is the overall approach on how I would go about the GS3 paper. I hope this was of value. Thank you very much.